Yeah, you heard me. That wasn't clickbait. I really believe Halo would curb stomp 40k. And I know what you're thinking. The UNFC and the Covenant would get curb stomped by the Imperium because of sheer weight of numbers. And you may have a point there, but before we get into that, let's cover Halo and 40k's backstory. Now, both races are similar that they both had a race of eldritch god abominations ruling them. Starting out with the old ones were an incredibly technologically advanced and psychically active race. They were incredibly powerful. Just imagine an entire race of the God Emperor of mankind, but a bunch of fat frog people instead of Giga Chad. Now you may be wondering, how the F did a race of the God Emperors go extinct? Well, that's because of the cancel patients. Alright, the old ones were approached by an entire race of the cancel world and asked them for a cure for cancer, and B, immortality. They said no to both, and the two went to war. The old ones beat the ever-loving crap out of them before the Necrons went running. Then the Necrons had a whole debacle where they sold their souls and their flesh to this race of gods known as the Catan, and then with their new metal bodies were able to launch a multi-million-year war against the old ones, where the old ones were pushed so far, where the old ones had their backs against the wall so hard they had to create multiple new races to fight them, like the Eldoi and the Quarks being essentially Orcs 2.0, or the original Orcs. Yeah, so this war was called the War in Heaven, lasted millions of years, and had the deaths of entire civilizations and untold amounts of people. Do I even have to clarify how impressive it is that you had battles with millions of Quarks, each one as strong as a Custodian, and the old ones still lost? Bruh. Yeah, the old ones were incredibly powerful, but the Necrons and Catan were even more. This war was incredibly impressive, but eventually this reality's version of gods were wiped out. And the few who survived the war were picked off by the Enslaver Plague, which were like these wheeled psychic warp parasites, which would burrow into your psychic essence and essentially feed off you and then create more enslavers. So yeah, the old ones, incredibly impressive, incredibly powerful. Millions of what are the equivalent of Custodians and possibly Primarchs, not to mention the Eldoi, but they still got folded. Now, let's compare that to Halo's equivalent of the old ones, the Precursors. Now, the old ones may have seemed pretty powerful, which they are, but what are they supposed to do when the Precursors throw a galaxy at them? Yeah, let that sink in. The Precursors could straight up throw galaxies at people. Yeah, the Precursors, Jesus Christ, they were just something else. The Precursors were a godlike race, far more powerful than the old ones, that would literally just eldritch gods. As opposed to just a hyper-advanced, super powerful, super psychic race that were like gods, these guys were straight up gods. Like the old ones, they went around seeding the galaxy with life, but unlike them, they had complete control over essentially everything. They were completely neutral. They didn't see good or evil, they just created more life, and they loved the circle of life. They thought the bad of life would add more to it. So they loved the pain and the pleasure. They were completely neutral. One day you would have one of them being a god doing godlike stuff. The other day that guy would be a farmer on some backwater planet, starving. Yeah, big fans of that whole circle of life thing. Now you might be wondering, if these guys were so powerful, then why'd they go extinct? Well, that's because there was a faction that is the equivalent, that is very similar to the Necrons, being that ancient, super technologically advanced race, except I would say the Forerunners would bitch slap the Prime Necrons. Why do I say that? They had thousands and thousands of Dyson spheres. For those of you who don't know, Dyson spheres is when you take a sun and you build a giant solar panel around it, capturing all of its energy. They obviously had the Halo wings, which could destroy all life everywhere. They had, obviously, like everyone else in Halo, they had the peak faster than light travel, which was just creating wormholes. Instead of going super fast, they could literally just whip a hole through our galaxy and then step through to where they needed to go. They had more advanced weaponry than the Necrons. They had more advanced tech than the Necrons, better ships, better weapons, better armaments, better everything than the Necrons. And in their prime, they controlled over 3 million planets. They had constructs where you'd have millions of these little fuckers flying around planets, destroying whatever they needed to. At one point, humanity and them went to war, and after absolutely dogging humanity and the Flood, they essentially they thought it'd be a funny punishment to de-evolve humanity back into its more primal form. Do I have to say? They de-evolved humanity back into the primal form, essentially for the memes. And when some of the Forerunners essentially learned of the truth on how they defeated the Precursors, they had effing panic attacks because how in the hell did we beat these guys? Although short, everything I've listed about the Forerunners is true, and despite that, the Forerunners are more powerful than the Necrons, in my opinion, and the Precursors are more powerful than the Old Ones. Alright, so Prime Old Ones and Prime Necrons were defeated. So let's see how modern Halo and modern 40k square up. By the way, I'll be using like the original UNFC, not whatever crap is out now. I'll be comparing the UNFC and the Covenant versus 40k's factions, mostly the Imperium. First of all, this isn't a contest. The Imperium wins through sheer weight of numbers. I would say the UNFC is more powerful than the Imperium of Man, pound for pound at least. But pound for pound doesn't matter, because the Imperium has over 1 million planets and the UNFC has less than 500. Now I'm not gonna get into detail on exactly why a Halo Marine is better than a Guardsman, or how a Guardsman is better than a Marine. You get the point. Now, I will say when it comes to Super Soldiers that the average Spartan 2 is probably beating the average Space Marine. But the thing is, as I said, the average Space Marine. The thing is Spartans are usually pretty consistent in power. Master Chief and the best Spartan Master Chief and one of the weakest Spartans are still relative. Meanwhile, the average Space Marine and Tyberos the Red Wake is an ocean between them. So, yeah, the best Space Marines are gonna dog the best Spartans, but the average Space Marine is gonna be slightly worse than the average Spartan. Although, keep in mind, there's only 1,500 Spartan 2s, meanwhile there's 1 million Space Marines. And each Space Marine is a chapter of 1,000. The Imperium, besides the Super Soldiers, and even then they win because, not to mention they have things like Custodians, more elite Space Marine units, and not to mention just way more Space Marines than they have Spartans. Not to mention they can mass produce Space Marines. You can have a Space Marine chapter that hasn't had contact with the main Imperium for 100 years, and they can still make Space Marines. Meanwhile, only 1 or 2 people know how to make Spartans, and it's still a really hard to do process. The Imperium just has more soldiers, more industrial, more men, more everything. And it's more or less the same with the Covenant. I mean, don't get me wrong, the Covenant would put up a better fight, not to mention they use plasma weapons, and plasma weapons are a pain in the butt against the normal Imperium, but the Tau use plasma weapons and the Imperium can still win. Now, don't get me wrong, if the UNFC and the Covenant will just magically poofed into the 40k universe, I could pretty much see them sending multiple crusades against the UNFC, taking all of them into 40k, into the Imperium, just forcing the entire UNFC into the Imperium, while they send crusades against the Covenant. These crusades against the Covenant, I imagine, would go the same way they did against the Tau. They'd kill each other a little bit, they'd kill each other a little bit, and then knock it off. Now, don't go wrong, it would still be pretty bad, because the Tau are objectively a pretty calm, peaceful race. Meanwhile, the Covenant are certainly not, so there would definitely be more fighting, And I do believe that the Covenant are overall a stronger faction than the Tau. But just like the Tau, the Imperium could body the Tau if they wanted. It's just that it takes so many resources that they'd pull resources into it, and then next thing you know, one of the 50 million wars they're fighting doesn't have the resources to continue on, so they'd lose over there. So it'd just be a little enemy faction. Essentially, it'd just be like the Angry Tau. So, I mean, the UNFC would get eaten by the Imperium, and meanwhile, the Covenant is just a little one of millions of skirmishy wars. Skirmishy on and off wars. Although, unlike the Tau, this would be much more on than off. So yeah, old Halo beats old 40k, but new 40k beats Halo, is at least what I would say if it wasn't for the Flood. Now you might just be asking yourself, what's the Flood? The Flood are the most terrifying and just objectively best and most efficient version of zombie in all of fiction, in my opinion. You know that point where the Imperium has over 1 million planets and like 11 plus trillion guardsmen? Yeah, that's gonna serve to their detriment in this scenario. I believe 1 or 2 Flood Spores could absolutely curve stomp the entire 40k galaxy. Unless, of course, they exterminate the first planet they pop up in, which they might, but they also might not. They might think it's some form of chaos corruption, not knowing that it's far worse. Think about it. A single Flood Spore ends up on a planet, in just a few days, the entire planet is covered in flood and gets overrun, and by the time they get around to exterminating the planet, the Flood Spores have already made it all over the place, because the Flood are very intelligent. And would realize, hey, the Imperium has exterminatus tier weaponry after they eat enough of the local PDF, and they would make dang sure that they get onto as many ships as possible and begin to travel through the warp, using the knowledge of the people they took to then make it to as many hive cities or orc planets as possible. That's because the Flood have a fun little ability where they gain the memories and intelligence of everyone they eat. So they eat some PDF units, Planetary Defense Forces. They find out that the real military, the Guard, have exterminatus tier weaponry, and when they find out the Flood are there, they're probably going to exterminatus the first planet they land on. So they begin to board ships. They absorb. They take over the crew, and they find out how to use warp travel, and they find out where the juicy planets are, juicy undefended planets are, and the Flood begin to infest the entire galaxy from there. Not to mention, if one Flood Spore gets onto an orc planet, that might be better than a Imperium planet, because the Imperium's gonna put up a much better fight. Meanwhile, the orcs the first orc that gets infected, everyone's just gonna think he's weird, kill him, and then all the spores from the Flood is gonna infect the other orcs, and then it's gonna repeat the process until there's enough Flood orcs to just overpower and infect the rest of the orcs. Now, don't get me wrong, the Flood wouldn't be getting too much intelligence from this, but they sure as hell would be getting a lot of soldiers, and not to mention ships, equipment, and so on and so forth. Not to mention a whole lot of biomass to make Flood pure forms. But again, I do think their main target would be the Imperium. And as many troops, as many guardsmen, as many PDF guardsmen, sisters, space marines that the Imperium can throw at the Flood, I genuinely believe a single Flood Spore in the white spot could absolutely demolish the 40k universe. And don't get me wrong, if they're smart and they're able to exterminate a planet before it, gets out of hand, they'd be fine. Or if it lands on a formal world and they're able to, call for backup, then the backup gets eaten, and they exterminatus, it'd get well. But one thing to note is that exterminatus is kind of like a meme in 40k. It gets used really rarely, and, even if there's, hardcore chaos corruption, they'd rather, cleanse the planet as opposed to just nuking it. Because, a cleansed planet is a lot more useful than a exterminatus planet. So, because of their actual usual hesitance to exterminatus, I do believe that the Flood would be able to beat 40k, because after they infect a few hundred human planets, which would be really easy, especially using the 40k ships and especially the warp drives, getting on a few dozen hive getting a few dozen mostly undefended hive worlds would be a walk in the park, and after that, they are just gonna win. Like, keep in mind, everything I mentioned with the Forerunners, how powerful the Forerunners from Halo were, the Forerunners got their... When the Flood was actually trying, the Forerunners got absolutely bodied by the Flood. The Flood are simply unstoppable. Hell, to the point where the Forerunners, which are a much more advanced race than even the Necrons and the and the Imperium, much more advanced than those guys, the only way they could stop them was by annihilating all life in the galaxy, including their own, and then having their robots reseed the life. And I said robots. Yeah, robots and AI are not safe from the Flood. They have this wacky little thing called the Logic Plague, which can straight up just infect which can just straight up infect machines. So the Necrons are not safe. The Necrons, some of them are working against the Tyranids, so that way, you know, the biomass, so that way the meat bags don't get eaten by the Tyranids. But the thing is, the Tyranids actually have to, you know, send a massive fleet to every planet they want to consume. All the Flood have to do is send one spore to every planet. Yeah, good luck. And not to mention, they can again infect the Necrons and use their crazy technology. So yeah, Halos. So yeah, the UNFC and the Flood and the Covenant's lower troop numbers and their lower populations actually really help them against the Flood, which the Imperium of Man definitely won't have that advantage, given the fact that they have hive cities with hundreds of billions of people in close proximity. So yeah, while doing this video, I did kind of realize that both settings were even more similar than I thought. Both have a very old, ancient, godlike race, that being the Old Ones and the Precursors, that were then overthrown by the Necrons and by the Forerunners, who were then both eventually surpassed by humanity. Humanity, in both settings, had a much more intelligent, scientific time before then, you know, being pushed back into a less progressive time, which is what we have now. Anyway, I definitely might do the. I definitely might cover more Halo and 40. I'm definitely gonna cover more 40K content, but I might cover more Halo content. You did notice that I kind of rushed through most of these factions because I didn't want this video to be half an hour long. So if you guys want me to do more Halo content, please leave it in the comments. And if you want me to keep up with 40K content, please leave it in the comments. Make sure to like, subscribe, do everything you're supposed to do. Yeah, so both settings are kind of similar, but that's okay. I like it. They both have a unique spin on it. Like, the only reason that the Precursors were beaten by the Forerunners is because they saw their deaths as a part of the cycle of life, so they essentially allowed the Forerunners to defeat them, which, sorry I didn't touch on in that section, whatever. Meanwhile, the Old Ones were straight up just bodied by the Necrons. Anyway, if you want me to cover the entire Halo timeline in far more detail, because there were many things I left out, like the fact that the Flood the fact that some of the Precursors turned themselves into dust, and that dust eventually got fed to space dogs and became the Flood. Yeah, if you want me to cover more of this, please leave it down in the comments. Make sure to like, subscribe, do everything you're supposed to do. If you have any video ideas or things you want me to cover, please make sure to comment your ideas. If you have any ideas or any factions from any universe you want me to cover, please leave them down in the comments below. Please make sure to like, subscribe, comment, do everything the Chaos Gods of YouTube love. And yeah, I really hope you enjoyed this. I was definitely very short with all the factions. Like, I didn't go super into depth on exactly why a Spartan would probably beat an average Space Marine. Yeah, so I was definitely short with the factions, so if you want me to cover them more deeply, you know what to do. If you guys like the Halo content, I can make more of it, because I do have a pretty, expansive, I do know a lot about Halo. Obviously, I know more about 40K, because look at the channel name. But if you want me to cover more of this stuff, please leave it down in the comments, and Sorry I didn't go super in depth on exactly why Master Chief would beat the average, on exactly why a Spartan would beat a Space Marine, but why Space Marines would win a long-term war. But yeah, if you like this, you know what to do. So yeah, Halo absolutely demolishes 40k. See you in the next one.